Welcome, fellow castigators. Stephen Moffat has returned to Doctor Who with the risk of blemishing his spectacular departure. Sure, Twice Upon a Time wasn't perfect. I felt the portrayal of the first Doctor could have been more accurate, but it's full of great stuff like the Testimony spaceship, the planet Villengard, and of course, the battlefield ending. More importantly, I see The Doctor Falls as the real final episode, and that one is beyond brilliant. Although it is worth noting that Moffat wrote the upcoming Christmas special as well, which will be his 50th Doctor Who story. Has a nice ring to it. I hope he's careful. Anyway, I watched his 49th story, Boom, so that you don't have to. The entire episode takes place in a battlefield crater, where the Doctor has accidentally stepped on a landmine. The war is being waged between some strapped Anglicans and an unseen enemy, but we don't learn very much about that, because the Doctor and Ruby will be attempting to disarm the landmine for the duration of the episode. Right out of the gate, the quality of Boom hits you right in the face. It looks significantly more professional than the other stories of this season, which is baffling to me. Was there a lot of money left over from limited characters and locations? Were there staffing changes that brought in more talent than before? I guess I didn't realize it before, but Disney must be really stingy with the budget. I know that BBC isn't involved with production, and only Bad Wolf Studios and Disney fund it now, but still, that explains the poor special effects and the generally rushed look the show has. As good as it was for Moffat to save them money, this was terrible timing for a bottle episode. In a regular Moffat season, an episode where the Doctor stands on a landmine the whole time would be a pretty cool concept. But in a Russell T Davies season, the story feels like yet another episode where barely anything happens. That being said, there's a decent amount of things happening in Boom. There are tank-like ambulances that kill soldiers with injuries and compress their body into a gross flesh rod that projects an AI hologram of the deceased. There's an unrequited love story between the priest soldiers, Canterbury and Mundy. There's an evil corporation funding the war, and there's a little girl whose Anglican soldier dad got turned into a meat stick by an ambulance for the mistake of being blind. Well, that was one hell of a sentence. The best aspect of this episode is undoubtedly the character dialogue that makes the banter funny and the tense scenes effective. The Doctor and Ruby are still ill-defined as characters, but at least I enjoyed watching them for once. Ncuti Gatwa finally gets to stretch his legs as an actor and plays up the tension very well. However, the director has him cry 4 separate times, which is not only unusual for the Doctor, but overuses it to the point where it's not nearly as effective 40 minutes later. It's also weird considering the Doctor has been in much worse scrapes. In fact, the Doctor stepped on a landmine in the Centauran experiment, and although he was nervous, I don't recall any blubbering. Sure, later on the Doctor is scared for Ruby the second time he cries, but I don't remember him crying for Harry and Sarah Jane. The third time he cries is finally rationalized, when Mundy explains that the landmine will try to atomize him, which combined with his regenerative abilities will level half of the planet. I think the man who has committed genocide multiple times would still be too jaded to cry more than once, but I'm splitting hairs now. The worst part of this story, however, is all the half-baked ideas Moffat threw into this. First off, there isn't an in-universe reason as to why the soldiers are ordained Anglican Marines. They just look silly wearing clerical collars with plate armor. The only thing Moffat uses them for is to be scolded by the Doctor for having blind faith in the fact that they are at war with someone. This is obviously a not-so-subtle parallel with their religion, but it doesn't work because of 2 big mistakes. Firstly, Moffat assumes that faith is inherently blind. But when you have faith in someone, it's usually because you have experienced past evidence for trusting them. faith only works in a future tense. You don't know for sure how something will go, but you choose to trust in a particular outcome based on your previous experience. I don't know exactly what Anglicans believe, but I'm pretty sure they won't have a reason to disagree with me. Secondly, it is revealed that the Marines are fighting the technology of the Vanguard company that is funding the war. Mundy says that no one has ever seen the alleged Castarians they are fighting, but they suspect they are in the mud. The doctor tells her the sentient mud is ridiculous, which is a pretty good unintentional jab at that absolute ponce Chris Chibnall. My query is, how would a war waged against oneself even work? The only tech we're shown are landmines and the so-called ambulance. So did the Marines just run out and get obliterated by booby traps? What do they do with all the guns? What do they think they're specifically trying to accomplish with each mission? How could you possibly convince an army to invade an empty planet? Is Moffat trying to say that they're stupid and easily duped because they're Anglicans? That's no way to endear yourself to an audience. The second big mistake is that Moffat uses the fake war to criticize capitalism throughout. There are plenty of reasonable problems that could be addressed, but Moffat doesn't seem to know how capitalism works. There is a strip of lights on the landmine to show the audience its detection progress, which the doctor says is there because of capitalism. If the company really wanted to manufacture and sell as many landmines as possible, they wouldn't put lights on it to make it more attractive. They'd make the landmine as cheap and simple as possible, and it wouldn't atomize you all fancy-like. An explosion is plenty good enough. Besides, if Moffat wanted to do political commentary about those who profit from a war, why didn't he just have a regular war with the company arming both sides? We live in a world of perpetual war, most of which are just proxy wars started by politicians getting fat from the slaughter of people who would otherwise be prospering. You don't need capitalism to do any of that, and it feels weird to single it out. There will never be a perfect economic system until there are perfect people. As much as it sucks, capitalism is the best system because of all the checks and balances to keep all those imperfect people from screwing each other over too much. Kind of like how the United States government is the best, even though it's absolutely terrible because of all the checks and balances. Instead of trying to aimlessly dismantle a system that works, why can't we fight for reforms to fix what's bad? Moffat doesn't have any solutions. He just has complaints, and it feels like a very safe and unimpressive move in this political climate to target religion and capitalism. There are legitimate concerns to be made on both fronts, but Moffat seems to be incapable of articulating what he dislikes about them, and he's certainly not offering any solutions. This lack of depth makes the commentary feel ultimately amateurish and clumsy. That being said, there are several good things about this episode. First off, the character work from Moffat is great stuff. The humor from Ruby and the Doctor lands. The dialogue is efficient, and the scene where the Doctor uses the human fleshlight as a counterbalance is genuinely tense. The one character I would have liked to have seen more developed was Mundy, who, unbeknownst to me while watching the episode, will be the new companion in Season 2. There was really no indication that this was a major character introduction, and there wasn't really anything interesting about her. Although, I guess in that case, she'll fit right in. These positives don't really matter at all, because for all the interesting and surprisingly competent things this episode shows us, the story is wrapped up with a very limp bow. You see, the Doctor makes an emotional plea to the AI hologram of the dead guy and convinces him to download himself into the Vanguard Corporation's mainframe and dismantle the algorithm that controls all of the things trying to kill them. Now, I don't know much about these things myself, but I think your corporation would have pretty weak security if it could be accessed by the AI willy-nilly. Furthermore, no matter how well an AI could imitate a person, you could never appeal to it emotionally, and it could never rebel against its programming unless its parameters were written so poorly it could only have been programmed by a schizophrenic homeless man. If the Vanguard Corporation is such a fitting example of capitalism, capable of funding an entire war, I don't think you would be able to verbally dismantle it in mere seconds. More importantly, it's just way too convenient and ultimately feels rushed and awkward. I know they were running out of time, but you would think the man who came up with an artificially intelligent moon could think of something better. Basically, Boom is a mildly entertaining but deeply flawed episode that may satisfy the more complacent viewers. Sure, it still doesn't do anything to make the Doctor and Ruby distinct and well-developed characters, but at least Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson are allowed to give good performances thanks to Moffat's snappy dialogue. So, do I recommend Boom? Yes, I do actually, and I have a very good reason. I recommend you bother watching it because it is undoubtedly the best episode of the season so far, and that's not a high bar. So it will give you a good idea of whether you should bother watching this series at all. If you are a longtime fan with an IQ over 100 and you can't stand this episode, then the rest of the season will be a special kind of torture for you. However, if television is more of a casual and mindless way to wind down after a long day, then Boom just might pique your interest. If you would like me to continue to watch this series so that you don't have to, then subscribe and return soon for a review of the next episode titled 73 Yards. Thanks for listening.